A poor, single mother goes to a job interview at a major company in New York. But her daughter runs up to a young billionaire and says, "Can you pretend to be my dad just for today? That's my mum. Isn't she beautiful?" When he looks at the woman, he's stunned. The alarm went off at 6 in the morning, but Anne had already been awake for at least an hour, staring at the ceiling while mentally rehearsing answers to potential interview questions. This wasn't just any opportunity, it was the chance she needed to finally achieve financial stability after years of struggling on her own. "Mommy!" Claire's sleepy voice sounded at the bedroom door. Wearing unicorn pajamas, the little girl rubbed her eyes with one hand while clutching her well-worn stuffed bunny in the other. Anne smiled, momentarily pushing aside the anxiety that was consuming her. "Good morning, my love. You woke up early today." "So did you," Claire replied, shuffling her feet toward the bed and climbing up with her mother's help. "Today's the day you go to that big company." "Yes, it is," Anne confirmed, tucking a stray lock of her daughter's messy hair behind her ear. "And you're coming with me?" Claire's face lit up. "I am," she exclaimed, suddenly wide awake. "I get to see where you're going to work. You'll see where I might work," Anne corrected, trying not to raise expectations for her daughter or herself if everything goes well in the interview. Anne's original plan was to leave Claire with their neighbor, Mrs. Rose, who often helped watch the little girl when needed. However, the older woman had called the previous night to say she had to travel to care for her sick sister. Anne's other options, her mother and her sister, lived in another state. With no other choice, she'd have to take Claire along. Breakfast was rushed. Anne dressed her daughter in the prettiest blue dress she had, brushed her hair, and secured it with a ribboned headband that matched the dress. "Remember what we talked about, Claire?" Anne asked as she applied her own makeup, trying to cover the dark circles under her eyes. "Today you need to be a very well-behaved princess," Claire finished, swinging her little legs from the kitchen chair. "I won't make noise or run around." "That's right, and if you behave, we might stop by the ice cream shop afterward." "Promise?" "I promise." Anne sealed the deal with a kiss on her daughter's forehead. Throughout the entire bus ride, Anne mentally recited her resume, her qualifications, and the answers she would give. The job at ABP Enterprises would mean not only better pay, but also health insurance for Claire and more stable hours. It would mark the end of months of temp jobs and financial uncertainty. When they finally arrived at the impressive steel and glass building, Anne felt a lump in her throat. Maybe bringing Claire wasn't such a good idea after all. What if the company frowned upon a candidate who shows up with a child? But there she was. There was no turning back. "Wow, Mommy. It's so tall," Claire exclaimed, tilting her head back to try to see the top of the building. Anne gave her daughter's hand a gentle squeeze. "It is. Shall we go in?" The lobby was even more impressive than the exterior. Marble floors, a decorative fountain in the center, leather sofas, and ornamental plants strategically placed. Claire stared at everything with wide-eyed admiration. Anne approached the reception desk, where a stern-looking woman checked her ID and confirmed her interview time. 12th floor, main conference room. "You'll be called in about 15 minutes, the receptionist said, casting a quick glance at Claire. "Thank you," Anne replied, leading Claire to one of the sofas. But the little girl was far too fascinated to just sit. The constant movement of people, the ringing phones, everything was new and exciting to her. Anne could barely focus on her final mental review for the interview while trying to keep Claire close. "Mommy, look at that pretty fountain," Claire said, pointing to the water feature in the center of the lobby. "Can I go see it up close?" "You can, but don't put your hand in the water, okay? And stay where I can see you." Claire nodded enthusiastically and walked over to the fountain, admiring the coins shining at the bottom. Anne kept an eye on her, dividing her attention between her daughter and mentally reviewing the main points she wanted to highlight in the interview. That's when Claire, seemingly bored with the fountain, turned her attention to the area near the elevators. One man in particular caught her eye. Tall, dressed in an impeccable suit, with a well-groomed haircut and an air of authority about him. Anne was checking her documents in her folder when she realized Claire was no longer by the fountain. Her heart pounded until she spotted the child near the elevators, approaching an executive. Before Anne could stop her, Claire was already tugging on the man's suit jacket. "Mister," Claire's childish voice rang clear. The man turned, surprised, and bent down slightly to the child's eye level. "Yes? Can you pretend to be my dad just for today? That's my mom." "Isn't she beautiful?" Claire asked with the typical innocence of a child, pointing toward Anne. Anne arrived at that exact moment, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "Claire, I'm so sorry, sir. She's—" Anne began apologizing, gently pulling Claire by the arm, not yet looking directly at the man. "She has a big imagination." "It's all right," the man replied, in a voice that made Anne freeze instantly, a voice she knew all too well, a voice she hadn't heard in years, but could never forget. When she finally lifted her gaze, the impact felt like a punch to the stomach. Standing there was Thomas, the same Thomas who had left her without an explanation years ago, the same man she had sworn never to see again. His eyes widened in recognition, his mouth opening slightly in surprise. "Anne?" he murmured, disbelief evident in his tone. The world seemed to slow down around them. The lobby's bustle, the chime of the elevators, all of it turned into distant noise as they locked eyes. "Thomas," was all she managed to say, her throat suddenly dry. 1,000 questions, recriminations, and memories flooded her mind. What was he doing there? Did he work for that company? The terrible possibility that he might be involved in the position she was interviewing for began to form in her thoughts. The receptionist's voice over the sound system broke the moment. "Ms. Anne Martins, please proceed to the 12th floor for your interview." Claire looked curiously from her mother to the elegant man, not understanding the tension that had suddenly filled the air. "Mommy, do you know him?" she asked, tugging on Anne's hand. "Yes, sweetheart," Anne answered, regaining her composure. "We knew each other a long time ago." Thomas still appeared shocked, his gaze shifting between Anne and Claire, as if trying to process the situation. He began, but Anne cut him off. "I have to go. My interview," she said firmly, mustering all the composure she could. Holding Claire's hand more tightly than necessary, Anne headed to the elevator, feeling Thomas's eyes fixed on her back. Her heart pounded so hard it felt as though everyone could hear it. As the elevator doors slid shut, Anne took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Of all days in this particular company, fate had placed Thomas in her path again. She pressed the button for the 12th floor, heading to her interview, her heart racing not just from nerves about the job, but also from the revelation that Thomas, the man who had left her years ago, was unexpectedly back in her life. The elevator zoomed up to the 12th floor, but for Anne, every second felt like an eternity. Her heart was still hammering as she tried to process the shock of seeing Thomas again. Claire, blissfully unaware of her mother's emotional storm, was fascinated by the panel's illuminated buttons. "Mommy, we're here," the little girl announced as the doors opened with a soft chime. Anne inhaled deeply, clutching her folder of documents to her chest as if it were a shield. "Yes, honey. Now, remember what we talked about. You'll sit quietly outside while Mommy does her interview." The floor was sleek and modern, with glass walls revealing spacious offices and a large open work area. A courteous receptionist greeted them. "Good morning, I'm Anne Martins. I have an interview for the administrative assistant position." "Good morning, Miss Martins. Mr. Westfield is waiting for you in the conference room," the receptionist said, glancing at Claire with a smile. "We have a small waiting area with some books and crayons if your daughter would like to keep busy." Anne thanked her and guided Claire to the indicated area, settling her on a comfortable sofa. "You'll stay right here, okay? Mommy won't be long." "Will that nice man be there?" Claire asked, already flipping through a picture book from the table. Anne swallowed hard, still unsure if Thomas would actually be the interviewer. Maybe it was just a terrible coincidence, and he had nothing to do with the hiring process. "I'm not sure, sweetie." "Now be a good girl, all right?" Claire nodded, immersed in the colorful illustrations. Anne adjusted her blazer, checked her reflection in a nearby mirror, and walked toward the room the receptionist had pointed out. Approaching the door, she saw through the glass the familiar silhouette of Thomas, seated at the head of the conference table, reviewing documents she assumed were her resume. Her suspicion was confirmed. Thomas Westfield, the man who had abandoned her years ago, would be her interviewer. Anne knocked softly and entered after hearing a response. Thomas looked up, and for a brief moment, his controlled expression faltered. He stood, extending his hand mechanically. "Miss Martins, please have a seat." Anne shook his hand, noticing the faint tremor in his grip. Even that brief, professional contact unleashed a torrent of memories she struggled to suppress. "Thank you, Mr. Westfield." They both sat, and an uncomfortable silence lingered for a few seconds as Thomas organized the papers on the table, clearly trying to regain his composure. "I see you applied for the administrative assistant position," he finally said, his tone artificially neutral. "Do you have experience in that role?" "Yes," Anne replied, grateful he'd started with professional topics. "I worked as an administrative assistant at JL Consulting for 2 years, scheduling meetings, organizing documents, and providing support to the sales team." Thomas nodded, making notes. "And after that?" "In the past few years, I've worked as a receptionist in medical offices and also took on temporary office assistant roles in different companies." She didn't mention that temp jobs had been her only option after Claire's birth, when she needed more flexible hours, nor that she'd left her last job 2 months earlier when the company downsized. Thomas continued with questions about computer skills, phone etiquette, and file organization. Anne answered crisply, staying professional and avoiding any hint that they shared much more than a casual conversation once upon a time. Still, it was impossible not to notice how he occasionally looked away, how his jaw clenched when she spoke at length, or how his fingers tapped lightly on the table, signs she recognized from when he used to be nervous. "You mentioned proficiency with Excel and document management systems. Could you elaborate on your experience with those tools?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the paper, avoiding prolonged eye contact. As Anne described her experience with spreadsheets and digital filing, her mind split between the technical explanation and the memories pushing to the surface. She recalled Thomas 6 years ago in the small cafe where they'd met, his captivating smile. She newly graduated and full of dreams. She remembered weekends at the beach, the plans they'd made, the promises, and then, the most painful memory, the day he simply disappeared. A brief message saying he needed time, that he wasn't ready for the commitment she seemed to want. 2 weeks later, upon discovering her pregnancy, Anne tried desperately to contact him. To no avail. Disconnected numbers, unanswered emails, mutual friends claiming he'd moved abroad. "Ms. Martins." Thomas's voice pulled her back to the present. "I asked about your scheduling availability." Anne blinked, quickly refocusing. "Oh, yes. I'm available for full business hours, but I have some limits on overtime due to personal commitments," she said, thinking of Claire. "But I can adjust with advance notice." Thomas jotted something down, and Anne sensed he understood the implication. "And about your daughter?" he asked unexpectedly, surprising her with the direct mention. "I noticed she's here with you today." Anne tensed, unsure of his intentions. Was this relevant to the interview, or was he fishing for personal information? "Claire is quite adaptable," she answered carefully. "I have a support network to watch her when necessary." Thomas nodded slowly, finally meeting her gaze for the first time since she'd entered the room. "She seems like a lovely child." Anne couldn't determine if there was a hidden meaning in his words. Could Thomas be suspecting something? Had he done the math regarding Claire's age? "Thank you," was all she said, deciding not to elaborate. Thomas cleared his throat, returning his attention to the papers. "Well, your experience as an administrative assistant appears to fit what we're looking for," he continued in a professional tone. "We need someone organized and efficient to support the management team. I'm known for my organizational skills and my ability to prioritize tasks," Anne replied, thankful for the shift back to business. "I handle multiple demands simultaneously and keep everything in order." For almost 40 minutes, the interview proceeded, with Anne demonstrating her administrative experience while both carefully avoided the elephant in the room, their past and unasked questions about Claire. Finally, Thomas closed the folder containing Anne's resume and clasped his hands on the table. "I believe we've covered all the necessary points, Miss Martins. We have a few more candidates to interview, but you'll be notified of our decision soon." "I appreciate the opportunity," Anne said, rising to her feet. "ABP is a company I've always admired, and I'd be very happy to be part of the team." Thomas stood as well, hesitating briefly, as though wanting to say more. For an instant, Anne glimpsed the Thomas she once knew, vulnerable, uncertain, before his professional facade returned. "It was interesting to learn about your professional background," he said formally, extending his hand once more. Anne accepted the handshake, acutely aware of the double meaning behind every word. "Likewise," she replied, holding his gaze firmly, refusing to show how deeply this reunion had shaken her. Leaving the conference room, Anne felt emotionally drained, as though she'd run a marathon. She couldn't tell if the interview had gone well professionally. She had answered all the questions competently, but the palpable tension between them might have affected his evaluation. Claire was still on the sofa, now happily drawing on a notepad the receptionist had presumably given her. "Mommy, look what I made!" she exclaimed, holding up a colourful sketch of 3 stick figures that Anne guessed were herself, Claire, and a man. "That's lovely, sweetheart," Anne said, feeling a lump in her throat. "Let's go, we need to get home now." As they waited for the elevator, Anne couldn't resist looking back toward the conference room, where Thomas stood behind the glass wall, watching them. Their eyes locked briefly before the elevator doors opened. Inside the elevator, Claire cheerfully chatted about the drawings she'd made. Anne barely listened, her mind swirling with unanswered questions. What would happen now? Did Thomas realize Claire might be his daughter? And if she got the job, what would it be like to work every day with the man who abandoned her when she needed him most? Stepping out of the building into the afternoon sunlight, Anne had only one certainty. The past she believed she'd left behind had resurfaced in an unexpected way, and the consequences were impossible to predict. The small third-floor apartment was quiet, except for the sound of rain tapping against the living room window. Anne sat at the kitchen table, spreading the bills in front of her while Claire watched a cartoon on the old second-hand tablet they'd been given. Electricity, water, internet, rent already 2 weeks late, Claire's school fees. Anne ran a hand through her hair repeatedly, doing mental calculations. The paycheck from her last temp receptionist job would cover only part of the expenses. The looming threat of eviction from the landlord was her constant nightmare. "Mommy, I'm hungry," Claire said, appearing in the kitchen with her plush bunny dragging on the floor behind her. "Can we make macaroni and cheese?" Quickly, Anne gathered up the bills, hiding them in a folder. She didn't want her daughter sensing how dire their situation was. "Sure, my love. Let's make macaroni and cheese," she said, smiling as if everything were fine. "Want to help Mommy cook?" Claire nodded eagerly, running to grab the little stool she used to reach the countertop. Moments like these were precious to Anne. Despite all the difficulties, seeing her daughter happy over something so simple made it all worthwhile. As they cooked together, Anne's thoughts kept drifting back to that morning's interview. She couldn't shake the image of Thomas, immaculate in his suit, looking so shocked to see her. 6 years had passed, yet seeing him again was as intense as she had always feared it would be. "Mommy, you're burning the macaroni," Claire's alarmed voice snapped Anne back to reality. "Oh!" she exclaimed, quickly turning off the stove. "I got distracted for a moment. Thanks for telling me, hey, my little chef." During dinner, Claire chatted about the drawings she'd made at the company and the books the receptionist had shown her. Anne responded automatically, her mind split between truly hearing her daughter and battling the never-ending financial worries. After the meal, as she washed the dishes, Anne glanced at the calendar stuck to the refrigerator. Red circles indicated bill due dates, and sticky notes reminded her of Claire's school obligations. Next week, there would be a school presentation requiring a simple costume. Another expense Anne had no way of covering. A position at ABP Enterprises would mean a stable paycheck, benefits, maybe even a decent health plan for Claire, who often dealt with seasonal allergies. But working every day with Thomas, Anne scrubbed a plate harder than needed. "Mommy, that fancy man at the company is really handsome, isn't he?" Claire asked suddenly, appearing by her side with her empty cup. Anne choked on her own saliva. "Which man, Claire?" the one you know. He was in that room with you. The receptionist said he's the director of an important department. Anne sighed. Of course Thomas would hold an important position. He had always been ambitious and talented. He must have built a successful career while she'd been juggling temp jobs and single motherhood. Yes, he's a high-level businessman. He smiled at me when we were leaving from the door of his office, Claire continued, handing Anne the cup to rinse. Do you think he'll let you work there? That innocent question hit right at Anne's deepest fear. If Thomas had the final say, would their personal history work against her? Or worse, would he figure out Claire's age and do the math? I don't know, sweetheart. There are other candidates too, she replied, trying not to build up false hopes. Now let's get you in the bath before bedtime. In the small bathroom, as she lathered shampoo into Claire's hair and listened to her daughter hum a school song, Anne's mind drifted back 6 years. Her relationship with Thomas had been intense and filled with plans. He had just graduated top of his class and received several job offers. Anne was still in her last semester of college. They'd talked about moving in together after she graduated. Thomas spoke of building a solid career, and she dreamed of working in a marketing firm. Everything seemed perfectly aligned until the morning Anne woke up to find only a message on her phone. I need time to figure out what I really want. I think we're moving too fast. I'm sorry, but I need to find my own path now. No further explanation, no face-to-face talk. She had tried calling, texting, even going to his apartment, but Thomas had simply vanished. Friends said he had accepted a job out of state. 2 weeks later, Anne found out she was pregnant. Her desperate attempts to reach him went nowhere. His number was disconnected. Emails got no response. A friend said Thomas had traveled overseas. It was as if he had evaporated. "Mommy, the water's cold," Claire complained, snapping Anne back to the present. "Sorry, honey," she said, rinsing her daughter's hair and wrapping her in a soft towel. After the bath, Anne helped Claire into her pajamas and sat on the edge of the bed for their nightly story, a ritual they never skipped, no matter how tired Anne was. That night, Claire chose a book about a family of rabbits having adventures in the forest. "Mommy, why don't I have a dad like Lily in my class?" Claire asked suddenly, stopping the reading. Anne felt her chest tighten. It wasn't the first time her daughter asked that question, but it never got any easier to answer. "Some families are different, my love. Some have a mom and a dad. Some just have a mom, others just a dad, and some have 2 moms or 2 dads. But where's my dad?" Anne took a deep breath before answering. "Your dad lives very far away, and he couldn't stay with us." It wasn't a complete lie, but neither was it the whole truth. How to explain abandonment to a child without making her feel unloved? "So he didn't want to meet me?" Claire asked, her large, curious eyes locked on her mother's face. "It's not that, sweetheart. It's complicated. When you're older, we'll talk more about it, okay? Let's finish this story so you can sleep." Claire seemed to accept the answer, at least for now, and Anne continued reading, grateful for the distraction. When the little girl finally drifted off, Anne stayed by her side for a few minutes, watching her serene face. It was times like this that Thomas's absence weighed heaviest, not because Anne missed him, she had gotten over the relationship long ago, but because of what Claire was missing by growing up without a father. He hadn't witnessed her first steps, her first words, the countless milestones they would never share. Anne quietly left the bedroom and returned to the kitchen, where the bills still awaited her. She was about to resume the impossible calculations when the phone rang. Checking the time, nearly 10 at night, an odd hour for calls, she rushed to pick it up before it woke Claire. "Hello, Miss Martins," said a professional-sounding female voice on the other end. "This is Helena from the Human Resources Department at ABP Enterprises." Anne held her breath. A call from HR at this hour was unusual. "Yes, this is she. I apologize for the late hour, but I'd like to invite you to come back to the company tomorrow at 10 a.m. Mr. Westfield requested a second meeting with you." A second meeting? Anne's heart raced. That meant she was a finalist, or that Thomas simply wanted another chance to speak about their past. "I'll be there," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Thank you for letting me know." After hanging up, Anne sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands trembling slightly. It was a mixture of hope and apprehension. The job represented financial security. No more sleepless nights scrounging for coins to make ends meet, but it also meant seeing Thomas every day, the man who'd left her when she needed him most. She got up and went to Claire's room. The little girl was asleep, hugging her worn-out stuffed bunny, her dark hair spread across the pillow, hair so much like Thomas's. Anne adjusted the blanket and brushed a strand of hair away from her daughter's face. There, in the dim light of the bedroom, she made a silent promise. "No matter what happens tomorrow, I won't let anything or anyone threaten what we've built. You are always my priority." In the quiet of the night, with rain still tapping at the window, Anne allowed herself a moment of renewed resolve. They had survived 6 years without Thomas. If needed, they could survive many more. Yet a small part of her, the part that still remembered her younger self's dreams, couldn't help wondering if tomorrow might be the start of something completely different. The next morning, the sky was clear after the overnight rain. Anne left Claire with Mrs. Daisy, an elderly neighbor who occasionally helped watch the little girl in emergencies, and headed to ABP Enterprises with a mixture of anxiety and hope. This time, the imposing steel and glass building felt even more intimidating. Anne checked her reflection one last time in the revolving door before entering. She wore her only formal outfit, a navy pencil skirt and a simple white blouse, complemented by a small pearl necklace inherited from her grandmother. On the 12th floor, instead of being directed to the same conference room where Thomas had interviewed her, the receptionist led her to the Human Resources Department. "Mrs. Oliveira is expecting you," the receptionist said, indicating a door labeled Helena Oliveira, HR Manager. Anne knocked lightly and entered after hearing a friendly, "Come in." Helena Oliveira was a middle-aged woman with a warm smile and keen eyes. She stood to greet Anne. "Miss Martins, it's a pleasure to meet you in person. I'm Helena. We spoke on the phone last night." "The pleasure is mine," Anne replied, shaking the extended hand. "Please, have a seat," Helena said, indicating a chair in front of her desk. Once they were both settled, she continued, "I have great news. After careful consideration, ABP would like to offer you the administrative assistant position." Anne felt a wave of relief so intense it nearly made her dizzy. Despite all the emotional complications involving Thomas, this job represented the stability she desperately needed. "That's wonderful," she replied, trying to maintain composure. "Thank you so much for the opportunity." Helena smiled, handing her a folder. "Here are the details of the offer: salary, benefits, health insurance, and other important information. There are also forms we need you to fill out to formalize your hiring." Anne skimmed the documents, barely believing the salary. It was significantly higher than what she'd made as a receptionist. The health plan included dependents, meaning Claire would finally have decent medical coverage. "The IT department urgently needs an administrative assistant," Helena went on. "So if possible, we'd like you to start next Monday. Would that work for you?" "Absolutely," Anne answered without hesitation. "I'm available to start right away." Helena seemed pleased. "Great. You'll be working directly with the IT department director, Mr. Westfield. He was quite impressed with your resume and experience." A chill ran through Anne. So Thomas really would be her direct supervisor. There was no avoiding daily contact with him. "I see," she said, trying not to show her discomfort. "I'm looking forward to contributing to the team." After completing the required paperwork and receiving a temporary company badge, Anne was introduced to a few HR staff members and briefed on company procedures. The conversation she anticipated and dreaded with Thomas apparently wasn't on the agenda. "Mr. Westfield is out for an external meeting today," Helena explained, wrapping up the office tour. "But he'll be here on Monday to welcome you personally." Leaving the building, Anne felt both relieved and anxious. She had secured the job, but the confrontation with her past had merely been postponed, not avoided. On Monday, Anne arrived 30 minutes early. After dropping Claire off at school, her tuition now less daunting with the new salary, she made her way to ABP determined to maintain a strictly professional demeanor. The IT department occupied half of the 10th floor. A young systems analyst named Paul greeted Anne and showed her around. "Your desk is right over here," Paul explained, indicating a workstation near a glass-walled office. "That's Mr. Westfield's office. He usually arrives by 8:30, but he mentioned he might be late today." Anne looked at Thomas's office, feeling her heart race. The desk assigned to her was positioned so she would inevitably see him coming in or out. As his administrative assistant, she would be in constant contact. Paul demonstrated the phone system, the shared files, the break room, and the department's meeting area. Everyone they passed was friendly, greeting her with curious smiles. "The team here is really nice," Paul commented. "The only one who sometimes seems a bit distant is the boss, but he's fair, demanding but fair." Anne nodded, not trusting herself to say anything about Thomas. She was organizing her desk when she heard commotion in the hallway. Thomas had arrived, talking with two executives. He wore a grey suit she'd never seen before, but his profile and posture were exactly as she remembered. The executives said their goodbyes, and Thomas turned to enter his office when he noticed Anne. For a split second, there was that same hesitation, the same flash of surprised recognition she had seen in the interview. Then he adjusted his expression to a professional mask and approached. "Miss Martins, welcome to the team," he said formally, extending his hand. "I hope Paul has shown you everything you need to know." "Yes, Mr. Westfield, thank you," Anne replied, returning the handshake with a small nod. "I'm ready to get started." "Excellent." Thomas looked like he wanted to say more, but only managed to ask, "Are you comfortable so far? Settling in well?" The question carried more weight than the words suggested. Anne knew he was trying, in some way, to acknowledge the awkwardness of the situation. "I'm fine, thanks," she replied simply. "Eager to contribute to the team?" Thomas nodded, appearing to understand that she intended to keep things strictly professional. "I have some correspondence on my desk that needs sorting and a few calls I'd like you to return," he said, fully assuming his role as boss. "When you have a moment, please stop by my office so we can go over it." "Yes, sir." Thomas hesitated a moment longer before retreating into his office. Anne exhaled deeply, attempting to calm her racing heart. Would every day be like this? The rest of the day passed in a blur of new information, introductions, and initial tasks. Anne interacted with Thomas only when necessary, keeping conversations strictly about work. She noticed he did the same, though she occasionally caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. By the end of the day, Anne felt mentally exhausted but pleased with her performance. She had managed to maintain her composure and demonstrate competence despite the extraordinary circumstances. That evening, when she picked Claire up from school, the little girl threw her arms around her with enthusiastic delight. "How was your day, Mommy? Did you work in that big building?" "Yes, my love. Mommy got the job," Anne replied, smiling as she saw her daughter's joy. At home, they prepared a simple meal together to celebrate. Anne had even bought a small cake on the way, prompting Claire to jump up and down with excitement at the unexpected treat. "Does that mean we can buy more books now?" Claire asked, her mouth rimmed with chocolate. "Yes, and maybe even that coat you liked in the store window last month," Anne answered, feeling grateful to finally be able to give her daughter a bit more comfort. After putting Claire to bed and reading her a story, Anne sat on the tiny apartment balcony with a mug of tea in hand. The moon was nearly full, bathing the city in silver light. The relief of financial security mixed with deep apprehension. Working daily with Thomas would be an emotional challenge. Every time she saw him, she'd remember not only his abandonment, but also that he was Claire's father and didn't know it. How could she keep that secret, working so closely with him? What if Claire showed up at the office again? What if Thomas started to notice the similarities and ask questions? Anne sighed, watching the steam rise from her mug. Somehow, she would have to find the strength to face, every day, the man who had once walked away from her, the man who unknowingly had a 5-year-old daughter with eyes so much like his own. The first week at ABP flew by in a whirlwind of tasks. As Thomas's administrative assistant, Anne's responsibilities varied, scheduling meetings, organizing documents, screening calls, and preparing presentations. The work itself wasn't difficult, but being in constant proximity to her ex-boyfriend made each day a lesson in self-control. Anne stuck to a rigid routine. She arrived promptly at 8:15. Famati organized the day's agenda and prepared any necessary files before Thomas arrived. During the workday, she limited their exchanges to professional matters only, speaking only when absolutely necessary, and avoiding being alone with him more than required for instructions. "I need these spreadsheets updated by tomorrow," Thomas would say, keeping his gaze on the documents and avoiding prolonged eye contact. "Yes, sir. They'll be on your desk by the end of the day," Anne would reply, maintaining a neutral tone as though she were speaking to any other boss. The department quickly noticed the oddly formal dynamic between them, but chalked it up to Thomas's known professional demeanor. For his part, Thomas also seemed determined to keep an emotional distance. However, Anne often caught him watching her out of the corner of his eye, his gaze containing a mix of curiosity and something deeper she refused to analyze. Late on the Thursday of that first week, Anne was busy updating the filing system when she realized Thomas was standing in her office doorway, observing her more intently than usual. "Is there a problem, Mr. Westfield?" she asked without taking her eyes off the screen. Thomas seemed to snap out of a reverie. No problem," he replied, adjusting his tie. "I was just thinking, how's your daughter?" The seemingly casual question made Anne freeze for a moment. "She's fine, thank you," she said succinctly. "Claire, right? It's a lovely name." "Yes." Anne kept her answer short, trying not to show discomfort. "How old is she again?" he persisted, in a conversational tone. Anne felt her heart hammering. Why was he asking about Claire? 5, she replied, resuming her typing. Thomas nodded slowly. "It must be tough raising a child by yourself." "We manage," Anne cut in, making it clear she wasn't interested in continuing the conversation. Thomas seemed to get the message and backed off, excusing himself for a call he needed to make. But the encounter left Anne uneasy for the rest of the day. His questions hadn't felt casual. They seemed to have a purpose. What Anne couldn't know was that in his office, Thomas was increasingly consumed by a suspicion that had started when he first saw Claire tugging his jacket in the lobby, asking him to pretend to be her dad. The child's age lined up roughly with the time he and Anne had broken up. Claire's features, especially her eyes and face shape, evoked an unsettling sense of familiarity he couldn't dismiss. And that nagging question wouldn't leave him. Why hadn't Anne told him she was pregnant? By the end of that week, Thomas made a decision. After making sure Anne had left, he headed to the Human Resources Department. "Helena, I need to review the file of one of our employees," he said, using his authority as a department director. "Of course, Mr. Westfield, whose file is it?" Helena asked helpfully. "Anne Martin's, my new administrative assistant." Helena nodded and accessed the system. "Anything specific you're looking for?" "Yes," Thomas hesitated momentarily. "I need details about her health plan coverage for dependents. We're reviewing our benefits." It was a transparent excuse, but given his position, no one would question it. Helena showed him Anne's file on the screen, allowing him to see her personal information. As expected, Claire was listed as a dependent, but under father's name. It simply read, "Not provided." Thomas thanked Helena and left, more troubled than before. The lack of paternal information was, in itself, significant. Could be coincidence, but combined with Claire's age and resemblance, it reinforced his suspicions. That night, in his luxurious 10th-floor apartment, Thomas stared at the city through the panoramic window, a glass of untouched whiskey in hand. The possibility that he had a 5-year-old daughter he'd never known weighed on him like a lead weight. He recalled the abrupt end to their relationship. He'd received an irresistible offer to work abroad, an opportunity he believed essential to his career. Afraid a serious relationship would hold him back, he ended everything in a cowardly way, through a text. It had seemed like the right decision then, the only way to pursue his path without restraints. If Anne discovered her pregnancy afterward, she hadn't made any attempt to contact him, or so he believed at the time. But what if she had tried? He had changed his number, moved away, and cut ties with almost everyone from his old social circle. After a sleepless night of contemplation, Thomas made another decision. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. "Ricardo, it's Thomas Westfield. I need your services again." Ricardo Mendez was a discreet, efficient private investigator Thomas had previously hired for background checks on business partners. Thomas explained the situation without delving into emotions, presenting it as a fact-checking matter. "I want full information on Anne Martins and her daughter, Claire. Birth certificate, medical records, anything that could clarify the child's paternity." "Understood," Ricardo said, showing no surprise. "I'll need some basic details to start. Current address, previous workplaces, any contacts." Thomas provided everything he knew, including what he'd gathered from her job interview and from the subsequent days. "How long will it take?" he asked, unable to hide his impatience. "It depends on what I find. Birth certificates are public records, fairly easy to access. For more detailed information, it could take a few days. I'll start immediately." Thomas hung up, feeling a mix of anxiety and guilt. Part of him questioned whether he had the right to investigate Anne's life like this. Another part argued that if Claire really was his daughter, he had not only a right but a duty to know. That evening, while Anne read a bedtime story to a very unaware Claire, Thomas received a text from Ricardo. "Investigation launched. First results in 48 hours." Thomas's heart pounded at the sight of the message. Soon, he'd have answers to the questions haunting him. If Claire truly was his daughter, as he was increasingly convinced, his life would change forever. And so would Anne's and Claire's. 2 days after hiring the investigator, Thomas received a preliminary report via email. With slightly trembling hands, he opened the document on his computer, bracing for the findings. Anne Martins moved to this city approximately 5 years ago, 3 months after Claire Martins was born, the report stated. Previously, she lived in an apartment near the local university where she completed her degree. There's no record of her staying in that location past June 2020. Thomas did a quick mental calculation. They had broken up in December 2019, and Claire was born in March 2020. That timing perfectly aligned with a pregnancy he'd been unaware of when he left. Claire's birth certificate was issued in Chicago, continued the report. The field for paternity is listed as not declared. There's no record of a paternity recognition case or child support claim filed by Anne Martins against anyone. Thomas paused, reading for a moment, running his hands over his face. Why had Anne never reached out to him? If Claire really was his daughter, and the evidence strongly suggested it, why had Anne chosen to raise her alone, without telling him? "I managed to find a recent photo of the child from a school event," concluded the report. Attached was an image of Claire in a school uniform, smiling at the camera. Thomas felt a pang in his chest as he studied her face. Her eyes, the shape of her nose, her smile. It was like looking at a feminine version of his own childhood photos. He closed the file and leaned back in his chair, emotionally drained. Memories he had locked away began to resurface. Anne laughing as they walked hand in hand through the park, the plans they'd made for the future, the nights together in his old apartment. Then came the job offer abroad, his fear of commitment, his impulsive decision to end it all so he could leave freely. The intercom sounded, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Westfield, there's a meeting with the development team in 5 minutes, came Anne's voice. "Thank you, Ms. Martins. I'll be right there," he answered, struggling to keep his tone neutral. In the corridors of ABP, Thomas and Anne danced a careful dance to avoid moments of intimacy. He noticed how she subtly moved away when he approached, how she avoided being alone with him, even when they needed to discuss work matters. During the meeting, Thomas tried to focus on project updates, but his eyes kept drifting to Anne, who took notes discreetly in the corner of the room. He watched her hands, the same hands that had cradled Claire's first nights, that had wiped her tears, that had applauded her first steps. He was torn by admiration and guilt. Admiration for the strength Anne showed in raising a daughter alone, guilt for not being there. After the meeting, co-workers chatted excitedly about project details, but Thomas remained apart, lost in thought. "Mr. Westfield," Anne's voice pulled him back. "Here are the meeting notes and the items that need your follow-up." "Thank you," he replied, accepting the documents. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Thomas noticed how she immediately pulled her hand away. "How's Claire doing?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. Anne hesitated, clearly uncomfortable at the mention of her daughter. "She's fine," she answered curtly, already turning to leave. "Anne," he called, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. "Could we speak in private when you have a moment?" She tensed, visibly. "About work?" "Not exactly." Anne shook her head slightly. "I'm sorry, but I keep my personal life separate from my job. If it's not about ABP, I'd rather not discuss it." Without waiting for an answer, she walked away, leaving Thomas with unspoken words heavy in his chest. That Friday, at the end of the workday, Thomas received an update from Ricardo. The investigator had located the doctor who had done Anne's prenatal care and the hospital where Claire was born. He attached something significant, a scanned copy of Claire's complete birth certificate. Thomas studied it carefully. Mother's name, Anne Martins. Father's name, not declared. Date of birth, March 15th, 2020. And then one detail made his heart pound. Claire's blood type was O negative, just like his, a relatively rare type. It wasn't definitive proof, but combined with everything else, there was little doubt left. Thomas filed the document away and looked through the glass wall at the space where Anne worked. She was shutting down her computer, getting ready to leave. Thomas made a decision. He couldn't go on with this uncertainty. He needed direct answers, and only Anne could provide them. He texted Ricardo, "Suspend the investigation for now, I'll address this directly." Then he called Anne on the intercom. "Ms. Martins, before you go, could you please step into my office?" A minute later, Anne knocked softly and entered, maintaining a neutral expression. "Did you need something, Mr. Westfield?" Thomas drew a deep breath. "Yes. I'd like to speak with you on Monday after work. Would you be able to stay a bit later?" Anne frowned, suspicious. "May I ask what this is about?" Thomas paused briefly, carefully choosing his words. "It's an important matter we need to discuss in private." Anne's face turned slightly pale, her fingers tightening around her purse strap. "Maybe we can handle this during working hours," she suggested, her voice noticeably tense. "I'd prefer after hours," Thomas insisted, keeping his voice low but firm. "It won't take long." A tense silence filled the space between them. Thomas could see the conflict in Anne's eyes, the fear and apprehension. "Monday after work," he reiterated gently. "Please," Anne finally nodded, more out of resignation than agreement. "I'll be here." After she left, Thomas remained in his office, his heart pounding. He adjusted his tie in a nervous gesture. He was determined to confront Anne for definitive answers about Claire's paternity. Monday arrived with an undercurrent of tension. Throughout the day, Thomas and Anne kept their distance, speaking only when absolutely necessary. Their co-workers sensed the heavy atmosphere, exchanging curious looks as the two avoided even being in the same room alone. As quitting time neared, Thomas felt his heart pounding faster. He had rehearsed the conversation in his head countless times over the weekend, but nothing seemed adequate for the magnitude of what he was about to discuss. Anne, for her part, spent the day with a knot in her stomach. She had left Claire with Mrs. Daisy again, warning that she might be late due to a work meeting. The little girl was disappointed, but Anne promised to make it up to her. By 6 p.m., the department gradually emptied. One by one, employees said their goodbyes, leaving the floor in deepening silence. Thomas stayed in his office, arranging and rearranging documents that didn't really need organizing, just to occupy his hands and mind. When the last co-worker left, Anne took a deep breath and headed for Thomas's office. She knocked lightly and entered after hearing his voice. "Close the door, please," he said, standing up. Anne did so and remained by the entrance, as if preparing for a quick escape if needed. "I'd like us to use the smaller meeting room," Thomas suggested. "It'll be more neutral." Without waiting for a reply, he picked up a folder from his desk and guided Anne to a small room at the end of the hallway, usually used for informal meetings. Its glass walls provided acoustic privacy while maintaining the transparency the company required for after-hours meetings. Thomas closed the door and gestured for Anne to sit at the round table, taking a seat opposite her. For a few moments, silence hung between them, heavy with untold history and unasked questions. "Thank you for staying," Thomas began, his voice huskier than he intended. "I didn't have much choice," Anne replied, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "You're my boss." Thomas shook his head. "We're not here as boss and assistant. We're here as two people who share a past and who," he hesitated, searching for the right words, "possibly share much more in the present." Anne stiffened but remained silent, her expression carefully composed. Thomas opened the folder, taking out some documents. "I've been thinking a lot about our reunion and about Claire these past few days. I don't see why my daughter should be any concern of yours," Anne said, her voice tense. "Because there's a chance she's my daughter too," Thomas answered directly, watching Anne's reaction closely. Her face paled, but she didn't look surprised. It was as though she'd been expecting this moment since the day they'd bumped into each other. "What makes you think that?" she asked, her tone suddenly weary. Thomas laid out the documents on the table. "The dates line up, Anne. We broke up in December 2019 and Claire was born in March 2020. That puts her conception around June or July 2019 when we were still together." He slid a copy of Claire's birth certificate to the center of the table. "There's no father's name listed. And you moved out of Chicago 3 months after her birth, basically disappearing from your previous social circle." Anne looked at the document, her fingers trembling slightly. "You investigated my life?" she asked, her voice a mix of indignation and hurt. "I needed to understand what was happening," Thomas justified. "From the moment I saw Claire, something felt familiar. Her eyes, her smile. It's like looking at my own childhood photos." He took a deep breath before continuing. "Anne, I believe Claire is my daughter." The silence that followed was deafening. Anne's gaze dropped to the table as if seeking strength in its surface. "Why didn't you tell me?" Thomas finally asked. "Why raise a child on your own when her father could have—" "Her father," Anne interrupted, her voice rising for the first time. "The father who disappeared from my life with one text, who changed his number and moved without giving an address. That father?" "I didn't know," Thomas defended himself. "How could I know you were pregnant? I tried to find you," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I called, emailed, looked for your friends. No one knew where you were, or if they did, they wouldn't tell me." Thomas felt guilt tightening in his chest. It was true. When he decided to leave, he severed all ties, fearing any connection would hold him back. "She's my daughter, isn't she?" he asked directly. His eyes locked on Anne's. Anne held his gaze for a long moment before finally letting out a defeated sigh. "Yes," she whispered, "Claire is your daughter." Even though he already suspected, hearing it from Anne's lips felt like a physical blow. Thomas leaned back in his chair, reeling from the realization that he had a 5-year-old child he'd only seen twice in his life. "Why did you hide it from me, even after we saw each other again?" Anne wiped away a tear that had escaped. "At first, I couldn't find you. Later, I learned to live without you. And when we ran into each other," she shook her head, "I was afraid of what you'd do, whether you'd try to take Claire from me or reject her and hurt her the way you hurt me." "I'd never do that," Thomas protested. "Really?" Anne asked, bitterness creeping into her voice. "You left me with no explanation, Thomas. You vanished when you found a better opportunity. Why would it be any different with Claire?" Thomas had no immediate answer. It was true he had abandoned Anne selfishly, prioritizing his career over their relationship. "I was young and immature," he finally admitted. "I made choices I regret. But that doesn't justify you keeping my daughter from me for 5 years." "It justifies it for me," Anne replied, her voice steady despite the tears. "You weren't there when I was sick in the early months of pregnancy. You weren't there for the birth, for the nights she had a fever, for her first day of school. I built a life for us alone, with no help from you." With every word, Thomas felt the weight of his mistakes piling higher, crushing him with guilt over moments he could never get back. "I'm here now," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to be part of her life. I want to know my daughter, Anne." "And if you decide to leave again?" she asked, fear evident in her tone. Claire is a sensitive child. She already wonders about her father. If I let you into her life and you get bored and walk away—" "That won't happen," Thomas cut in firmly. "I've made many mistakes, but I won't repeat that one. She's my daughter. I want to be there for her, to make up for lost time." Anne abruptly stood, her emotions finally spilling over. "Lost time," her voice rose. "You talk like you're a victim of circumstance. You chose to leave, Thomas. You chose your career over us. I didn't choose to be a single mother, to spend sleepless nights worrying about bills and fevers and the future. You have no idea what it's been like raising Claire alone." Her words struck Thomas like arrows. She was right. Years ago, he made a choice, and now he stood before the consequences. A daughter he didn't know, and a woman scarred by his abandonment. "You're right," Anne said, grabbing her purse. "Claire is your daughter, but that doesn't erase what you did or give you the right to show up now demanding a place in her life. She's not a project you can pick up when it's convenient." She headed for the door, tears flowing freely down her face. Thomas stood but didn't stop her physically, respecting her space. "I'm not demanding anything," he said, struggling to stay calm. "I'm only asking for a chance to meet her, to be the father I haven't been." Anne looked back at him one last time, her hand on the doorknob. "I need time to think. This isn't about you or me, it's about Claire." Without waiting for an answer, she opened the door and left quickly, leaving Thomas alone with the truth now confirmed. Thomas collapsed into a chair, his mind filled with images of a little girl with big eyes and a familiar smile, a girl who shared his blood yet didn't even know his name, a daughter he hadn't seen grow up. He covered his face with his hands, overwhelmed by the years lost and the irreparable mistakes. But amid the pain and regret, a fierce determination took hold. Claire was his daughter, and he would do whatever it took to make things right. The apartment was quiet when Anne returned. Claire had fallen asleep at Mrs. Daisy's place. The older woman had agreed to keep her until late. Anne thanked her neighbor and carried her sleeping daughter up to their own apartment, gently laying her in bed. Sitting on the edge of Claire's bed, Anne watched her daughter's peaceful face, so unaware of her mother's emotional turmoil. She lightly brushed a strand of dark, wavy hair off the child's forehead, the same wavy dark hair Thomas had. Out on the small balcony, with an untouched cup of tea in her hands, Anne let the memories engulf her. The positive pregnancy test, initial happiness quickly replaced by despair when she realized she'd face it alone. The phone calls that went nowhere, the emails that got no replies. She remembered the labor, the nurse who held her hand instead of Thomas, the first few months with Claire, sleepless nights, financial sacrifices, and temp jobs where she sometimes had to bring the baby because she had no one to watch her. "I did what was right," she whispered into the night. "I had no other choice." Maybe it had been wrong to hide the truth from Thomas, even after she'd seen him again. But how could she trust the man who had left so heartlessly? How could she risk Claire experiencing that same rejection? Across the city, in his upscale apartment, Thomas also couldn't sleep. Sitting on the edge of his bed, he stared at nothing, processing the confirmation he'd received. Claire was his daughter. He had a 5-year-old child he knew almost nothing about. He poured himself a whiskey, more to occupy his restless hands than from any real desire to drink. Then he opened his photo gallery, searching for pictures of his own childhood. In one, at age 6, he wore the same slightly crooked smile he had seen in Claire. The family resemblance was undeniable. 5 years, he muttered into the empty room. "I've lost 5 years of her life." Guilt consumed him. He thought back to the cowardly text he'd sent Anne, ending everything so he could pursue his job abroad. At the time, he'd convinced himself it was the right decision for his career. What cruel irony. By running from commitment, he had lost the most important commitment of all, the chance to watch his daughter grow from the start. Morning arrived heavily for both of them. Anne dropped Claire at school and headed to work with a knotted stomach. How could she face Thomas now? The department was already busy when she arrived. She settled at her desk, turned on her computer, and started organizing the day's agenda, avoiding any glance toward Thomas's office. He arrived precisely at 8:30, as usual. He greeted the team politely and went straight to his office. closing the door. He made no attempt to speak to Anne, seemingly aware that she needed space. During the morning team meeting, they kept their distance. Thomas led the discussion professionally, Anne took notes quietly, and they avoided each other's eyes. Colleagues sensed the tension, but assumed it was some work-related disagreement. After work, Anne met up with Mariana, a longtime friend who was the only person she truly trusted in the city. They had met through their daughters, who attended the same school. "He knows Marie, Thomas knows about Claire," Anne blurted, as soon as they sat down in a cafe near work. Mariana's eyes widened. "What do you mean? Did you tell him?" "Not exactly. He hired a private investigator. He figured out the dates, saw the birth certificate. He confronted me last night." "My God, Anne, and what did he say? Does he want his rights as a father?" Anne ran her hands over her face, exhausted. "He said he wants to be part of her life, that he wants to make up for lost time." "And you? What do you think?" "I don't know, Marie. Claire deserves to know her father. I know that. But I'm so afraid he'll disappear again and hurt her, or that she'll get attached and then suffer." "Are you sure that's all it is?" Mariana asked gently. "Or are you also afraid of getting close to him again?" Anne averted her eyes. "This has nothing to do with my feelings. It's about Claire. Anne, you never really moved on after him. Maybe it's time to face your past, for the three of you." The next day at work, Anne was caught off guard by a new email in her inbox, this time from Helena Oliveira in HR. "Please come to the Human Resources Department at 2 p.m. today to discuss an important matter." Anne's heart pounded. Could Thomas have said something? Did the company discover their personal history? Was there a policy against this? Her greatest fear was losing the job. Would she lose the financial security she had just achieved? Worse, could Thomas be using his position to pressure her about Claire? Anne glanced at Thomas's office, where he worked intently, seemingly oblivious to the summons she'd received. Was this just a coincidence, or the start of more turmoil in her already complicated life? At precisely 2 p.m., Anne knocked on the HR department door, her palms sweaty. Helena Oliveira greeted her with a polite smile, inviting her to sit. "Thanks for coming, Anne. How are you settling in?" The casual question took her by surprise. She'd expected a more serious tone, maybe even accusatory. "I think I'm doing fine. I'm trying to learn quickly," Helena nodded, opening a folder that appeared to be a performance review. "Actually, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. We're very impressed with how fast you're adapting and how efficient you've been." Anne blinked, confused. "So I'm not here because there's a problem?" Helena raised an eyebrow. "A problem? Not at all. Quite the opposite. Your work has been excellent, Anne. The IT department is more organized since you came on board." Relief washed over Anne so strongly that she felt a bit dizzy. She wasn't being reprimanded. Thomas hadn't used his position to manipulate her. "Mr. Westfield specifically mentioned your organizational skills," Helena continued, checking her notes. "He said you've exceeded initial expectations." Anne was momentarily speechless. Thomas had praised her work, even after their emotional confrontation. The meeting lasted another 15 minutes, with Helena detailing the additional benefits Anne would receive after her probation period. She even offered Anne a small performance bonus. Returning to her desk, Anne found a small envelope with her name on it, written in the instantly recognizable handwriting of Thomas. She glanced around to ensure no one was watching and carefully opened it. "Anne, I want to apologize for how I approached the situation about Claire. You're right about many things. I was selfish and irresponsible in the past. I do not intend to interfere in your life or use my position at the company to pressure you. Your job here is secure on your own merit. However, I would like to meet my daughter, to be a part of her life in whatever way you think is appropriate. Claire deserves to know she has a father who, despite past mistakes, wants to be here now. Please think about it. The decision is yours, and I will respect whatever you choose." Thomas Anne folded the note and placed it in her purse, feeling an unexpected surge of emotion. The message was respectful, without demands or veiled threats. Thomas was giving her space and letting her decide, something she never expected from him. In the days that followed, Thomas kept his word. At the office, he remained cordial but distant, interacting with Anne only when needed, always in a strictly professional manner. He didn't mention Claire or try to initiate personal conversations. At home, on a peaceful Saturday, Anne watched Claire assemble a puzzle on the living room table. The girl's brow furrowed in concentration, a gesture so similar to Thomas's that it was almost like seeing a miniature version of him. The truth Anne had tried to ignore became undeniable. Claire carried her father in every gesture, every expression. The way she tilted her head slightly to the right when she thought, the way she bit her lower lip when focusing, even that crooked smile when she was especially proud of something. "Mommy, look, I finished this part," Claire exclaimed, pointing to the puzzle. "Well done, sweetheart," Anne said, sitting beside her daughter. "For you're very persistent, you know." "What does persistent mean?" "It means someone who doesn't give up even when things are hard," Claire beamed at the compliment. "Like you, Mommy, you never give up." Anne felt a pang in her chest. It was true, she'd never given up, forging ahead alone for the sake of her child. But that alone had been a choice after Thomas's initial abandonment. Now Thomas wanted to be there. Did she have the right to deny Claire that? That night, after tucking Claire in bed, Anne flipped through her daughter's photo album. The first bath, first steps, first day of school. Moments Thomas had never been part of. Part of her still seethed at him for not being there, but another part started to realize Claire deserved to know her father. Anne pulled out Thomas's note again, rereading his carefully chosen words. She sensed genuine sincerity there. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to take a small step forward. But how to explain to Claire that the nice man at Mommy's office was, in fact, the father she'd never met? How to introduce a stranger to her child as her dad? How to ensure Claire would understand that, no matter what happened between the adults, she was always loved? Anne didn't have all the answers, but she knew she needed to find them for Claire's sake, her own sake, and perhaps in some unexpected way, even for Thomas's. On Sunday afternoon, while a light drizzle fell outside, Anne made hot chocolate for herself and Claire. The conversation they needed to have demanded a warm, safe atmosphere. She had spent the previous night rehearsing mentally, searching for the right words to explain to a 5-year-old why her dad had never been around. Claire was on the couch in her pajamas, drawing in her favorite sketchbook. Anne placed the 2 mugs on the coffee table and sat next to her. "What are you drawing, honey?" she asked, peering over her daughter's shoulder. Claire held up the book, revealing a colorful picture of 3 people holding hands. "That's us," she explained excitedly. "Me, you, and Grandma." Anne smiled despite the ache in her heart. Soon, Claire's family drawings might include one more person. "It's beautiful. Hey, let's set the drawing aside for a bit. I made us some hot chocolate." Claire immediately dropped her pencil and grabbed her mug with both hands, blowing gently before taking a small sip. It's yummy," she said, sporting a chocolate mustache. Anne gently wiped her daughter's face with a napkin, bracing herself to begin. "Claire, remember that day we went to the big company where Mommy works now?" The little girl nodded excitedly. "Yes, the huge building with the pretty fountain. That's right. Do you remember the man we met near the elevator? The one wearing the suit?" Claire frowned in thought, then her face lit up in recognition. "The handsome man. Who's your boss now?" "Yes, that one," Anne confirmed, taking a deep breath. "His name is Thomas." Claire repeated the name under her breath, testing it out. "Thomas," she said, then smiled. "It's a nice name." Anne set her mug down and turned more fully toward her daughter, taking the little girl's hands in hers. "Claire, there's something very important I need to tell you about him." The child looked at her mother curiously, big eyes reflecting the seriousness she sensed in Anne's tone. "What is it, Mommy?" "Thomas isn't just my boss. Anne hesitated for a moment, then pressed on, her voice gentle but firm. "He's your father." Claire froze momentarily, eyes wide. Anne could almost see the gears turning as her daughter processed the information. "My dad?" she repeated in a small, uncertain voice. "That man is really my dad?" Anne nodded, watching her daughter carefully. "Yes, sweetheart, Thomas is your dad." Claire set her mug on the table, her expression growing serious in a way rarely seen on her usually cheerful face. "Then, why has he never come to see us before? Why wasn't he at my birthday parties?" The question, though expected, still struck Anne like an arrow. How to explain abandonment without vilifying Thomas, but also without distorting the truth? "It's complicated, my love," Anne began cautiously. "When you were in my tummy, Thomas and I broke up. He moved very far away and didn't know I was expecting you." Claire tilted her head, obviously trying to understand. "He didn't know I existed." "No, sweetheart. He left before I found out. And then—" Anne paused. "I couldn't reach him to tell him. It wasn't the complete truth, but it was a simplified version Claire could grasp without carrying the heavier, more painful details." "So when he came back," Claire pressed, surprising Anne with her insight. "When we saw him at the big building, you didn't tell him." Anne felt a lump in her throat. Her 5-year-old daughter had pinpointed the most delicate part of the issue. "At first, I was scared." "Scared of what? Is he mean?" "No, not that." Anne stroked Claire's hair. "I was afraid that if I told him, things might change for us. I was afraid you might get hurt." It was a half-truth. She was afraid Claire would be hurt, yes, but she was also afraid of reliving her own pain at Thomas's hands. "But now he knows he's my dad." "Yes, he does. He found out recently." "And is he happy?" Claire asked, an anxious note in her voice that broke Anne's heart. "Very happy," Anne said. And that at least seemed true from Thomas's reaction. "He really wants to meet you." Claire's face lit up with a smile. "I want to meet him too. Can I, Mommy? Can I meet my dad?" Anne inhaled deeply. For days she had considered every possibility, every risk, but seeing the hope in her daughter's eyes, she realized she could no longer avoid the inevitable. Claire deserved to know her father. "Yes, you can meet him." Claire gave a small jump of joy, clapping her hands. "When? Today? Tomorrow?" Anne smiled at her daughter's typical impatience. "Not so fast, little one. First, I need to talk to him and arrange a good time. You should also understand this will be new for all of us. We'll need to take it slowly, okay?" "Okay," Claire agreed, slightly less excited but still smiling. "Can I bring my bunny when I go see him?" "Of course you can." "And can I show him my drawings?" "I'm sure he'll love to see them." "And tell him I can tie my shoes all by myself?" Anne laughed, relieved at her daughter's positive reaction. "You can show him everything you want, my love." Claire grew thoughtful for a moment, fiddling with the hem of her pajamas. "Mommy, what should I call him? Dad?" The question caught Anne off guard. She hadn't thought that far ahead. "That's something you two can decide together when you meet." "There's no rush." Claire nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to sipping her now lukewarm hot chocolate as though the conversation had been about the weather. Anne, however, felt emotionally exhausted yet strangely relieved. The truth was out, and the sky hadn't fallen. Claire wasn't traumatized or crying. She was excited about meeting her dad. That night, after putting Claire to bed, Anne sat on the balcony with her phone in hand. She typed a message to Thomas. "I talked to Claire about you being her dad. She took it well and wants to meet you. We can arrange a meeting in a neutral place, maybe a cafe. Would Sunday afternoon work for you?" She hit send, watching the screen as 2 check marks indicated the message was read. Almost immediately, 3 dots appeared, showing that Thomas was typing. Anne realized she was holding her breath. His reply arrived seconds later. "Thank you, Anne. It means a lot. Sunday is perfect. You choose the place and time, whatever's best for Claire. I'm nervous, but so excited to finally meet her." Anne reread the message several times, looking for any hidden nuance. She found only genuine gratitude and anticipation. She pocketed her phone and looked at the night sky, feeling that a significant page in their story had just been turned. All that remained was to see how the next chapter would be written. The week following Anne's talk with Claire went by in slow motion. At work, she and Thomas stuck to purely professional exchanges, though they occasionally texted about logistical details for the meeting. "I suggest Cafe Haven in Green Park," Anne wrote. "It's quiet, has a small play area, and isn't usually crowded on Sundays." "Sounds perfect," Thomas replied. "Is there anything Claire especially likes? A particular cake or treat I could have ready for her?" His genuine concern about pleasing Claire surprised Anne. She hesitated before replying. She loves chocolate cake with strawberry frosting and orange juice. For the rest of the week, Claire spoke of little else. She peppered Anne with questions: when she'd meet her dad, whether he liked to draw, whether he knew cool stories, whether he had other kids. Anne answered patiently, trying not to set unrealistically high expectations, but not diminishing her daughter's enthusiasm either. On Saturday night, Claire insisted on picking out her own outfit for the next day, a blue dress with tiny embroidered flowers she'd received for Christmas and saved for very special occasions. Anne helped her set aside a small purse to carry her stuffed bunny and some drawings she wanted to show Thomas. "Mommy, do you think he'll like me?" Claire asked as Anne brushed her hair before bed. The question broke Anne's heart. How could a child doubt that she'd be liked? "Of course he will, my love. It's impossible not to like you." Yet Anne herself harbored a shadow of doubt. What if Thomas didn't connect with Claire? What if fatherhood turned out to be a heavier burden than he anticipated? What if— "Time for sleep," she said, shaking off the negative thoughts. Tomorrow is a big day. On Sunday, Thomas arrived at Cafe Haven 40 minutes early. He wore dark jeans and a light blue shirt, much more casual than his usual corporate suits. He ordered an Americano and chose a table at the back, near the small play area but not too exposed. His hands trembled slightly around the coffee cup. He'd faced board meetings, tense negotiations, and presentations to hundreds of people, but nothing compared to the nerves he felt now. He was about to formally meet his daughter, a child who shared his blood but whom he hadn't known existed until weeks ago. What would he say to her? How would he explain his absence? How could he make up for 5 lost years? He had bought a gift after hours of indecision. He didn't want to seem like he was trying to buy her affection with expensive presents. He chose something meaningful instead, a picture book about a brave girl and her rabbit friend who explore the world together, recalling Anne's mention of Claire's beloved stuffed bunny. Every time the door opened, Thomas felt his heart jump. 15 minutes early, he spotted Anne and Claire crossing the street, hand in hand. The little girl wore her blue embroidered dress, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, holding a small bag that likely contained her bunny. Thomas took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing pulse. Through the cafe's window, he watched Anne crouch down and say something to Claire, gesturing toward him. The child nodded, her face a mix of curiosity and shyness. Finally, they walked in. Thomas stood uncertainly, unsure whether to approach them or wait at the table. Should he hug Claire or just greet her? Anne resolved his dilemma by guiding Claire to his table. The little girl clung to her mother's hand, looking at Thomas with those hauntingly familiar eyes, the same ones he saw in the mirror each morning. "Hi," Thomas managed, his voice more strained than he'd intended. Then he crouched down to Claire's level, offering a nervous smile. "Hi, Claire. I'm Thomas." The child studied him briefly, tilting her head. "I know," she replied with a child's straightforwardness. "You're my dad." Thomas felt a lump form in his throat at those words. Her dad. He was a father to this child. The weight of that reality washed over him anew. "Yes," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your dad." A tense, brief silence followed, broken by Anne. "Shall we sit?" she suggested, indicating the table Thomas had chosen. Claire climbed onto a chair next to her mom, while Thomas took the seat opposite them at the round table. A waitress came over, and he ordered chocolate cake with strawberry frosting and orange juice for Claire, who beamed when she realized he already knew her favorites. "Your mum told me you like this cake," Thomas explained, seeing the surprised look on the little girl's face. "It's my favorite," Claire confirmed, more comfortable now. She opened her little purse and took out her threadbare stuffed bunny. "This is Mr. Ears. He goes everywhere with me." Thomas smiled, genuinely enchanted. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Ears," he said, gently squeezing one of the rabbit's ears. "Thank you for taking care of Claire when I couldn't," Anne observed them, a mix of relief and anxiety swirling within her. Thomas seemed at ease with Claire, neither patronizing nor awkward. Maybe this meeting wouldn't be the disaster she'd feared. When the orders arrived, Claire happily dug into her cake while peppering Thomas with questions. Do you like stories? Very much, he answered. When I was little, my favorite book was about a boy who built a treehouse. Can you draw? Not very well, to be honest, Thomas confessed, chuckling. Maybe you can teach me. Claire considered the idea. I can. I'm really good at drawing for my age. My teacher always puts my pictures on the classroom wall. The conversation flowed surprisingly naturally, with Claire effortlessly steering it, leaping from one topic to another in that distinctly childlike way. Thomas followed her lead, answering with patience and genuine interest. Occasionally, he glanced at Anne for guidance when more sensitive topics arose. Eventually, as Claire sipped her juice, she asked the question they all knew was coming. Why didn't you ever come see me before? Thomas's smile faded, and he briefly locked eyes with Anne before replying. Because I didn't know you existed, Claire, he said honestly. I left before your mom found out she was expecting you. It was a very big mistake I made. But now you know, Claire said, looking at him with those incisive eyes. Yes, now I know, Thomas confirmed. And I really want to get to know you, if you'll let me. I want to be part of your life. Like the dads of my friends at school, they pick them up and take them to the park. Thomas felt his throat tighten. So simple, yet so complicated. Yes, like that. If your mum says it's okay, he added, glancing at Anne. Anne, who had been quietly observing, nodded slightly. We can arrange that, she said, surprising herself with how easy the words came out. Suddenly, Claire remembered her drawings. She pulled some carefully folded sheets from her purse and handed them to Thomas. I made these for you, she said, a bit shy now. Thomas unfolded the pages, finding colorful, childlike drawings of a man in a suit, a woman with long hair, and a small girl between them, all holding hands. At the top, in shaky kindergarten handwriting, it read, My family. They're beautiful, Claire, Thomas said, voice catching with emotion. May I keep them? Yes, I drew them for you. Mommy already has lots of my drawings. Thomas folded the papers reverently and tucked them into his jacket pocket, close to his heart. Time passed quickly. Nearly 2 hours flew by. Claire, now more relaxed, told Thomas about her playground mishap that left a bruise on her knee, about her school friends, and asked if he could swim, because I'm learning and it's kinda hard. When Anne finally suggested it was time to leave, Claire surprised both adults with a request. Can we see each other again, she asked, looking from Thomas to Anne. I'd love to if your mom agrees, Thomas replied, clearly attempting to contain the hope in his voice. We'll see, Anne said. She didn't want to make hasty promises, but also didn't want to disappoint her daughter. But yes, we can probably arrange another get-together soon. At the cafe door, Thomas knelt down to Claire's level again. It was so nice to meet you, Claire. Thank you for the drawings. To his surprise, Claire leaned in for a quick hug. When she stepped back, she looked at him curiously and asked in a small voice, Can I call you Daddy? It felt like the entire world stopped for Thomas in that moment. That single word, so simple yet so powerful, echoed in his mind. He glanced at Anne, unsure, and saw she was equally moved, though he caught a flicker of concern in her eyes. I'd really like that, he said softly, but only if you want to. Claire nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. Bye, Daddy, she whispered, testing the word as if it were a secret just for them. As he watched mother and daughter walk away along the sidewalk, Thomas stood motionless, the weight and joy of that word, Daddy, reverberating in his heart. He was a father, and for the first time, he was beginning to understand what that truly meant. The call came in the middle of an important meeting. Thomas was presenting quarterly results to the board when his phone vibrated insistently in his pocket. Normally, he would ignore any call during such a pivotal presentation, but in recent weeks he had assigned a special ringtone to Anne, ever since she let him pick Claire up from school a few times a week. Excuse me, he said, cutting himself off mid-sentence about the chart on the screen. I need to take this call. The directors exchanged surprised looks. Thomas Westfield never interrupted meetings. In the hallway, he found Anne's voice trembling between sobs. Thomas, it's Claire. She could barely speak. We're at St. Clara Hospital. She fell at school, hit her head, and wouldn't wake up. The world seemed to freeze. Thomas felt cold rush through his veins. "I'm on my way," he said, voice steady despite the panic growing inside him. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Without detailed explanations, Thomas told Paul to finish the presentation, grabbed his suit jacket, and practically sprinted out of the office. In the elevator, he felt suffocated by how slowly it descended. His daughter was hurt, maybe gravely, and every second felt like an eternity. At the hospital, Thomas found Anne in the pediatric emergency waiting area, her eyes red and hands shaking. She stood as soon as she saw him, surprised he had arrived so quickly. "What exactly happened?" he asked, trying to keep calm. "She was on the school playground," Anne explained, her voice raw with emotion. "She fell off a swing and hit her head. When the teacher got to her, Claire wasn't responding. The ambulance brought her here. And now, do they know anything yet? They're running tests. The doctor mentioned a possible concussion, but they're checking for—" Anne couldn't finish, tears returning with force. Thomas impulsively put an arm around her shoulders. To his surprise, she didn't pull away. If anything, she seemed to take comfort in the gesture. "She'll be okay," he said, trying to reassure them both. "Claire's strong." An hour later, the doctor called them into a small consultation room. The concussion was confirmed, but thankfully the tests showed no intracranial bleeding. Claire would need to remain under observation overnight, and the staff had administered medication to reduce any brain swelling. "You can see her now," the doctor said. "She's still sedated, but she should wake up within a few hours. When she does, please alert the nursing staff immediately." In the hospital room, Claire looked so small and fragile in the bed, a bandage on her forehead and hooked up to monitors. Thomas felt a twist in his chest, unlike anything he'd ever experienced. 2 weeks ago, he hadn't even known he had a daughter. Now he couldn't imagine life without her. Anne sat in the chair beside the bed, holding Claire's tiny hand. Thomas remained standing on the other side, staring at his daughter's pale face, feeling utterly helpless. The hours crawled by. Nurses came periodically to check her vitals, reassuring them that everything remained stable. When one offered to bring a cot so a parent could rest, Thomas insisted that Anne use it. "You need some sleep," he said. "I'll keep watch over her." "I can't sleep," Anne replied, though she did accept the cot, settling down near her daughter's bed. Thomas took the chair, maintaining a constant vigil. Occasionally, he checked his phone, responding briefly to work messages, but he never considered leaving. Around 3 in the morning, Anne awoke to find Thomas still in the chair, eyes fixed on Claire, holding her small hand between his. "You haven't stepped out even once," she noted, her voice husky from sleep. Thomas shook his head. "I'm not going anywhere until she wakes up and I know she's okay." Anne sat up on the cot, watching him with a look of surprise and something else, possibly the stirrings of a trust she thought she'd lost. "Thank you for being here," she said at last, speaking softly and sincerely. "It means a lot to both of us." 6 years ago, I ran away from my responsibilities," Thomas said, meeting her gaze. "It was the biggest mistake of my life. I won't do that again, Anne. I won't abandon you two, no matter what." At that moment, a small movement in the bed caught their attention. Claire's fingers twitched, her eyelids fluttering as she tried to open them. Thomas and Anne both leapt up, positioning themselves on either side of the bed. When Claire finally managed to open her eyes, she seemed momentarily confused by the unfamiliar surroundings, until her gaze settled on the 2 worried faces hovering over her. A faint smile curved her pale lips as she saw both parents together. "Mommy, Daddy," she mumbled, her voice weak but audible. Thomas felt Anne squeeze his hand tightly, tears silently streaming down both their faces. In that moment of mutual relief, something shifted between them, a new understanding forged in the fear they'd felt and the certainty that, eat together or not, Claire's well-being would always be their highest priority. After a night of observation and additional tests the next morning, Claire was finally discharged. The pediatrician explained the necessary precautions for the next few days: rest, no intense physical activity, and an immediate return to the hospital if she showed any concerning symptoms such as excessive drowsiness, vomiting, or severe headaches. Thomas listened intently to each instruction, taking notes on his phone while Anne dressed Claire in comfortable clothes she'd brought from home. The little girl, still a bit pale, was nevertheless back to her spirited self, talking about how she wanted to show Mr. Ears the real bandage on her head. "I'll get the car and bring it around," Thomas offered once the discharge papers were finalized. "That way you don't have to walk too far." Anne nodded, relieved at his thoughtfulness. Under other circumstances, she might have insisted she could handle it herself, but the past 24 hours had drained her. Thomas's presence, surprisingly, was more reassuring than tense. On the drive to Anne's apartment, Claire fell asleep in the back seat. Through the rearview mirror, Thomas watched his daughter, a mixture of gratitude and awe filling him. "She recovers fast," he said quietly, so as not to wake her. "She has your resilience." Anne glanced at him briefly, surprised by his remark. "She's always had to be strong," she replied, turning her gaze back to the road. "We had no choice." There was no accusation in her tone, just a statement of fact, but Thomas felt the weight of it. They'd had to be strong because he wasn't there. When they arrived, Thomas carried Claire carefully to her bedroom, following Anne's directions. The little girl hardly stirred as he laid her in bed. Anne covered her with a light blanket and placed her stuffed bunny beside her, gently kissing her forehead. In the small living room, an awkward silence settled between them. Thomas debated whether to leave or offer more help. Anne seemed similarly conflicted. "Would you like some coffee?" she finally asked, breaking the tension. "I think we both need it after last night." "I'd love some," Thomas answered, sensing how significant that invitation was. In the compact kitchen, Anne prepared coffee while Thomas sat at the table, taking in the space she and Claire shared. It was a modest place but warm, with children's drawings taped to the fridge and framed photos of Claire through the years on the walls. A whole life he hadn't been part of. "Thank you for being there yesterday," Anne said, setting 2 cups on the table and sitting across from him. "I don't know if I could have handled that alone." "You don't have to thank me," Thomas replied. "She's my daughter, too. I should have been there for all the tough moments before this." Anne took a sip of coffee, seeming to gather courage for what she wanted to say. "You know what hurt the most, Thomas. It wasn't just being abandoned. It was realizing what we had meant so little to you that you could discard it with a single text." The raw honesty of her statement hit Thomas like a physical blow. "I was selfish and cowardly," he admitted, looking her straight in the eye. "I was so afraid of commitment, of feeling trapped, that I didn't realize I was running from the best thing that could have happened to me." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm not asking you to forget or forgive easily. I just want a chance to show I've changed, that I can be someone, Claire, and you can rely on." Anne studied his face for a long moment, as if searching for signs of deception or manipulation. What she saw, though, was remorse and uncertain hope. "I don't know if I can trust you again," she said honestly. "But I see how Claire lights up around you, how she already calls you Daddy so naturally. For her sake, I'm willing to try." Thomas inclined his head, acknowledging how huge that concession was. "That's all I'm asking. A chance, day by day." A small noise from the hallway interrupted them. Claire stood at the kitchen entrance, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Daddy's still here," she observed, her voice a blend of surprise and joy. "Yes, he is," Thomas confirmed, smiling at his daughter. "Your mom and I were just talking." Claire padded over to Anne, who scooped her into her arms, discreetly checking the little girl's temperature with the back of her hand. "I'm hungry," Claire announced, looking hopefully at the adults. "How about I make pancakes?" Thomas suggested. "They were my specialty when I was younger. Your mom can confirm." Anne couldn't help a small smile as she remembered lazy Sundays years ago, when Thomas would whip up pancakes while she brewed coffee. "He does make very good pancakes," she told Claire, whose eyes lit up with anticipation. "With chocolate syrup?" the girl asked, looking at her dad with wide, hopeful eyes. "If your mum says it's okay, as much chocolate syrup as you want," Thomas replied, shooting Anne a questioning glance. "Just for today, because it's a special day." Anne relented, swayed by Claire's excitement. The next few hours passed in a bubble of almost surreal normalcy. Thomas flipping pancakes in the tiny kitchen, Claire doodling at the table, Anne setting the table and occasionally helping him find utensils. To an outsider, they might look like any regular family sharing a Sunday meal. After the impromptu lunch, the three settled on the sofa to watch an animated movie Claire chose. The little girl nestled between her parents, leaning comfortably against both of them, as though the arrangement was the most natural thing in the world. Thomas caught Anne's eye over Claire's head. They exchanged a silent glance that spoke volumes. There was a long road ahead, scars that needed time to heal, trust that had to be rebuilt day by day. But in that moment, sitting side by side with the daughter they shared, there was also an unspoken promise to try, not necessarily for their own sakes, but for the small life they had created together. When Claire dozed off, her head resting on Anne's lap and her feet across Thomas's legs, he reached his arm across the back of the sofa and gently touched Anne's shoulder. "Thank you," he whispered, "for letting me be part of this." Anne placed her hand over his for a brief moment. "One day at a time," she answered softly, but there was a slight smile on her lips. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. A new day would dawn, bringing its own challenges and uncertainties. But for the first time in 6 years, Anne wasn't facing them alone. And Thomas, who had once run from commitment, was now finding in it the purpose he'd always been searching for. Claire shifted in her sleep, a small smile forming on her lips, as though even in her dreams she sensed the promise of better days ahead. The family that had never truly existed before was finally starting to take shape. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.